1944, German tank crews called it a Tommy Cooker. They mocked its thin armor. They laughed at its 75mm gun. But when their Panthers broke down for the third time that week, and their Tigers couldn't reach the front because they ran out of fuel, those same German crews started capturing Shermans and refused to give them back. This is the untold story of the tank that won World War II, not with firepower, but with something the Germans could never match: reliability. And the confession you're about to hear will shock you. December 1944, the snow-covered forests of Belgium. An American M4 Sherman tank crew huddles inside their steel box, knowing that somewhere in those trees, German Panther and Tiger tanks are waiting. The crew knows the brutal math. The Sherman's 75mm gun can't penetrate a Panther's front armor at any practical range. Meanwhile, the Panther's 75mm can slice through a Sherman like butter from over a mile away. British tankers had given the Sherman an unflattering nickname, Ronson, after the cigarette lighter with the slogan "Lights first every time." The grim joke referenced the Sherman's tendency to burn when hit. German crews called them Tommy Cookers. The reputation was brutal and in many ways deserved. The numbers seemed damning. The Sherman weighed 66,800 pounds, with armor ranging from just 0.59 to 2.99 inches thick. Compare that to the Panther's 100,000 pounds and armor up to 4.7 inches thick, or the Tiger's 120,000 pounds with armor up to 7 inches thick. On paper, sending Sherman crews into battle against these German monsters seemed like murder. General Lucius Clay would later recall with brutal honesty, "We were never able to build a tank as good as the German tank, but we made so many of them it really didn't matter." That statement has defined the Sherman's reputation for decades. The tank that won by numbers alone. Quantity over quality. Crews sacrificed because America's industrial machine could replace losses faster than Germany could inflict them. But that narrative, while popular, misses the bigger picture entirely. The M4 Sherman wasn't designed in 1941 to fight Panthers and Tigers. Those German tanks didn't exist yet. The Sherman was designed to be reliable, maintainable, producible, and versatile. It was designed to do a job, and do it consistently across deserts, forests, jungles, cities, and mountains. From North Africa to the Philippines, from Sicily to the Rhine, in British, American, Canadian, French, and even Soviet hands, nearly 50,000 Shermans rolled off assembly lines between 1942 and 1946. They were built by auto manufacturers, Chrysler, Ford and General Motors, companies that knew how to mass-produce reliable vehicles. The Sherman inherited Detroit's obsession with mechanical dependability and ease of maintenance. When the first Shermans arrived in North Africa in late 1942, they proved superior to German Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs, the actual tanks they were designed to fight. They were faster, more reliable, and had better gun stabilization. American crews could fire accurately on the move, while German tanks had to stop to shoot effectively. The problem came later. In 1943, Germany deployed the Panther and Tiger in response to Soviet T-34s on the Eastern Front. These were heavy tanks or specialized medium tanks with thick armor and powerful guns. They weren't designed for the same role as the Sherman. Comparing them was like comparing a sports car to a truck, different tools for different jobs. But on the battlefield, such distinctions didn't matter to the tankers getting shot at. The psychological impact was immense. Crews who saw their shells bounce harmlessly off Panther armor while watching their friends burn in knocked-out Shermans developed an understandable hatred for their own machines. Yet something curious happened as the war progressed, something that would only come to light years later, when historians examined German records and interviewed enemy tank crews. The Germans started stealing Shermans, and they loved them. To understand why German crews prized captured Shermans, you need to understand what reliability meant in World War II tank warfare. The Sherman used 4 different engines during its production run, but the most common were the Continental R975 9-cylinder radial aircraft engine, producing 400 horsepower, and later the Ford GAA V8 producing 500 horsepower. These weren't cutting-edge designs, they were proven, reliable power plants adapted from existing technology. In June 1943, U.S. Army testing determined the average Sherman service life at 1,500 miles. The Soviet 6th Guards Tank Army, using Lend-Lease M4A2 diesel Shermans, reported lifespans of 2,000 to 2,500 kilometers, roughly 250 to 300 hours of operation. This matched their T-34s, which Soviets considered excellent, but testing revealed something more important than pure endurance: ease of maintenance. In trials conducted in late 1943, 20 Sherman variants drove across 3 types of terrain: fine loose sand, clayey stony ground, and highways. Mechanics could replace any component except internal engine parts. The M4A4, with its Chrysler multibank engine, required just 45 hours of maintenance per tank during the trial. The diesel M4A2 required 143 hours for engine maintenance, but remained highly rated. Ford GAA engines averaged 255 hours before internal component failure, exceptional for the era. Compare this to German tanks. The Panthers Maybach HL230 engine was notorious for catching fire, especially in early models. The engine compartment was poorly ventilated, fuel lines were vulnerable, and the complex transmission failed frequently. Panthers often broke down before reaching the battlefield. A British officer commanding Sherman reliability trials in 1943 compared them to British Cromwell tanks and concluded, "They are utterly reliable. I do not think they are quite as good as the Cromwell across country when running on worn rubber tracks, but they appear so infinitely superior in every other way, particularly in reliability with minimum maintenance, that this cross-country consideration is completely outweighed." The Sherman's design emphasized interchangeable parts. A suspension bogie, the wheels and springs assembly, could be unbolted from one tank and bolted onto another in minutes. The front-mounted transmission could be completely removed without specialized tools. Crews could perform field repairs that would require factory work on German tanks. This modularity extended to everything. The Sherman used standardized components wherever possible. If a radio failed, you swapped it. If an engine threw a rod, you pulled the entire power pack and replaced it. German tanks, by contrast, required specialized tools, trained mechanics, and often factory-level teardowns for similar repairs. The Sherman's 5-man crew included positions designed around efficiency. The driver and assistant driver sat in the front hull. The commander, gunner, and loader worked in the spacious turret with a massive 69-inch diameter turret ring, larger than the Panthers' 65-inch ring. Despite the Sherman being a smaller tank overall, this turret ring size had profound implications. It meant the Sherman could accommodate gun upgrades without major redesign. The British mounted the 17-pounder anti-tank gun, one of the war's best, in the Firefly variant. Americans fitted the 76mm M1 gun in later models. The basic hull could accept these improvements because the design had room to grow. German tanks were pushed to their design limits from the start. The Panther couldn't be significantly improved without total redesign. The Tiger II was so heavy it broke bridges and couldn't use many roads. Complexity meant more things could break, and did. Soviet tanker Dmitry Loza, who commanded Lend-Lease Shermans, praised their reliability and ease of maintenance. He specifically appreciated the auxiliary power unit that charged batteries without running the main engine, something T-34s lacked. The Sherman wasn't just a tank. It was a product of American automotive engineering philosophy. Build it tough, make it fixable, and keep it running. Statistics from World War II tank combat reveal truths that contradict popular mythology about the Sherman. Between June and November 1944, U.S. Army operational research analyzed tank versus tank engagements in the European theater. The data showed that in direct combat between Shermans and German armor, the critical factor wasn't armor thickness or gun caliber. It was who saw whom first and who fired first. When Shermans spotted German tanks first and fired first, they won approximately 80% of encounters, even against Panthers. When Panthers spotted Shermans first, they won approximately 70% of encounters. The advantage of surprise and first shot outweighed technical specifications. This makes sense when you consider combat reality. Tank battles rarely occurred at maximum effective range in open terrain. Most engagements happened at 500 to 800 yards in cluttered environments, towns, forests, and farmland. At these ranges, a Sherman's 75-meter gun could penetrate Panzer IV side and rear armor. The 70-meter Sherman could threaten even Panthers from the side. The famous 5 Shermans to kill 1 Panther myth appears nowhere in actual combat records. Military historian Stephen Zaloga searched extensively for its origin and concluded it's likely a misunderstanding of U.S. Army doctrine. American tank platoons consisted of 5 tanks, so yes, 5 Shermans would be sent to engage enemy armor, but that was organization, not casualties required. Actual loss rates paint a different picture. In northwestern Europe from 1944-1945, Shermans achieved roughly 1.2.1 kill ratios against Panthers in direct tank versus tank engagements, meaning Shermans actually destroyed slightly more Panthers than they lost. This happened because Shermans were attacking, had numerical superiority, better crew training in later war, and superior logistics keeping them operational. But most tank losses didn't come from other tanks. U.S. Army analysis showed that anti-tank guns, mines, and Panzerfaust infantry anti-tank rockets caused 70–80% of Sherman losses. This was true for German tanks too. The Tiger's thick armor was irrelevant against a mine or a Panzerfaust striking from 30 yards. Production numbers are equally revealing. Germany manufactured approximately 6,000 Panthers, 1,247 Tigers, and only 492 Tiger IIs during the entire war. By comparison, the US produced 49,034 Shermans. But Germany also produced 8,500 Panzer IVs and over 10,000 Stugge III assault guns, vehicles roughly comparable to Shermans. The key difference: Sherman production was efficient and sustainable. American factories could produce a Sherman for approximately $45,000 to $50,000. A Panther cost roughly $100,000 and a Tiger over $250,000. Germany spent 3 times the resources to build a tank that broke down more frequently and was harder to repair. Reliability metrics are stark. In spring 1944 testing, a Sherman M4A3 covered 2,097 miles in 203 hours before failure. Panthers frequently broke down within their first 150 kilometers. The Tiger's final drive was so problematic that it often failed after fewer than 100 miles. This meant that while a Panther might be superior in a single engagement, divisions equipped with Shermans could sustain operations continuously. German armored units spent weeks waiting for spare parts and conducting maintenance. American armored divisions kept moving. The Sherman's mechanical availability rate, the percentage of tanks operational at any given time, averaged 85–90%. Panthers rarely exceeded 50% operational availability, and Tigers often fell below 40%. An army with half its tanks broken down loses to an army with most of its tanks running. Regardless of individual tank superiority, the numbers told a story German commanders understood all too well. Reliability was a combat multiplier that outweighed raw firepower. The most revealing evidence of the Sherman's quality comes from an unexpected source: German crews who captured and used them. Throughout the war, German forces captured hundreds of Shermans from American, British, and Soviet forces. The Wehrmacht designated captured Shermans as M4 748A, the A denoting American origin. Unlike captured Soviet T-34s, which Germans often modified extensively, they used Shermans exactly as designed. Photographic evidence and German after-action reports reveal crews who captured Shermans looked remarkably pleased with their new machines. Contemporary captions on German photos show crews praising the Shermans' reliability, fuel economy, and comfort compared to Panzer IIIs and IVs they'd previously operated. One revealing photo shows a late-production M4A2 diesel Sherman with a German crew. The original caption noted the crew was very pleased with the tank because it was more reliable, got better gas mileage, and was more comfortable than the Panzer III or IV they were stuck in before. German mechanics discovered the Sherman was a breath of fresh air in troubleshooting and maintenance. Even the complex Chrysler A57 multibank engine, 5 automobile engines connected to a single drive shaft, was easier to diagnose and repair than Panther transmissions or Tiger Final drives. Germans particularly valued captured Shermans as armored recovery vehicles, ARVs. They would remove the turret and use the Sherman hull to recover broken-down German tanks. This tells you everything. Even Nazi tank crews recognized that Sherman powertrains were tougher and more reliable than their own vehicles. The German desperation for tanks meant they eagerly employed any Sherman they could capture and repair. Some Shermans captured during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 were repainted with German crosses and put immediately into service. One M4A3 76mm Sherman captured from the U.S. 4th Armored Division was used in the defense of Aschaffenburg, Germany in spring 1945, where it was finally destroyed by an American M36 tank destroyer. Historical records show German crews sometimes abandoned their own tanks without booby-trapping them, simply walking away when Panthers broke down or ran out of fuel. This was particularly common in late 1944 as fuel shortages became critical and spare parts vanished. Conversely, Germans fought hard to keep captured Shermans operational, scrounging parts and fuel to maintain them. Soviet tanker testimonials provide another perspective. The USSR received over 4,000 Shermans through Lend-Lease. Many Soviet crews preferred them to T-34s. Dmitry Loza commanded the 46th Guards Tank Brigade, equipped with M4A2 Shermans. His memoir praised their reliability, noting the Sherman rarely broke down, and when it did, repairs were straightforward. Soviet crews appreciated specific features: the auxiliary power unit for battery charging, the gun stabilizer that allowed firing on the move, and the spacious interior that made long operations less fatiguing. The 5-man crew was also superior to the T-34's 4-man arrangement, which overworked the commander who also served as gunner. The T-34 had cramped interiors, poor visibility, difficult manual transmission, and primitive crew accommodations. Soviet tankers noted that Shermans were simply more pleasant to fight in, important during multi-day operations. Loza specifically mentioned that Sherman crews experienced less fatigue and could maintain combat effectiveness longer. French forces also received Shermans and continued using them into the 1950s. Interestingly, France tried using captured German Panthers after the war, but quickly abandoned them as utterly unusable due to mechanical unreliability. French tank units standardized on Shermans. Instead, even Israel's army used upgraded Shermans well into the 1960s and even the early 70s. The basic hull and mechanical design proved so sound that with new engines, guns, and armor, Shermans remained combat effective decades after WWII ended. No German WWII tank design showed similar longevity. The ultimate compliment came from enemy crews who, given the choice between their own nation's tanks and captured Shermans, chose the Sherman. That speaks louder than any technical specification. December 16, 1944. Germany launched its last major offensive in the West, Operation Wacht am Rhein, known to history as the Battle of the Bulge. Over 200,000 German troops, supported by nearly 1,000 tanks and assault guns, smashed into lightly defended American positions in the Ardennes forest. The German plan depended on speed. Panzer divisions needed to reach the Meuse River within 48 hours and capture Allied fuel depots, because Germany couldn't provide enough fuel for the operation. German tanks would literally run on captured American gasoline. The offensive achieved initial surprise. American units were overrun and German armor pushed westward. But within days, the plan began unraveling, not primarily due to American firepower, but due to German mechanical failures. Panthers and Tigers broke down in staggering numbers. The cold weather caused already problematic German transmissions to fail completely. Fuel lines froze. Engines wouldn't start. German maintenance crews worked frantically, but many tanks were simply abandoned when they couldn't be repaired quickly enough. American Sherman units, meanwhile, kept operating. The Sherman's automotive reliability proved decisive in the chaotic winter conditions. When Panthers broke down blocking narrow forest roads, the entire German advance behind them stalled. Shermans could bypass obstacles, recover disabled vehicles, and maintain mobility. The U.S. 7th Armored Division held the critical town of St. Vith for 6 days against overwhelming German forces. The Shermans operated continuously in sub-zero temperatures, providing mobile firepower that stabilized the defense. German after-action reports noted frustration that American tanks remained operational while their own Panthers sat disabled. At Bastogne, the 101st Airborne Division was surrounded but supported by armored units, including Sherman-equipped tank battalions. When General Patton's Third Army conducted a relief operation, his Sherman-equipped 4th Armored Division covered 150 miles in 3 days through winter weather, a pace German Panther units couldn't match even in summer. The breakthrough to Bastogne on December 26 relied entirely on Sherman mobility and reliability. The 4th Armored Shermans fought continuously for 72 hours with minimal maintenance. German tanks opposing them spent as much time being repaired as fighting. Weather played an equalizer role. In early stages, heavy fog grounded Allied aircraft, eliminating the American air superiority advantage. This meant tank versus tank combat and artillery duels, contexts where German armor supposedly excelled. Yet American armored units held their ground and even counterattacked successfully. The Sherman's mechanical reliability meant American commanders could count on their tanks being available. German commanders constantly faced situations where planned armored operations couldn't execute because half their tanks were broken down. Logistics records showed German armored divisions at 30–40% operational strength by late December, not primarily from combat losses, but mechanical failures. Fuel consumption also mattered critically. A Sherman M4A3 traveled approximately 100 miles on a full tank of gasoline. A Panther managed about 60 miles and a Tiger about 50 miles, and that's under ideal conditions. In winter warfare with poor roads, German fuel consumption increased dramatically. By December 24th, many German armored units were immobilized not from combat damage, but from empty fuel tanks and broken transmissions. The captured American fuel depots they desperately needed remained in Allied hands. German tanks sat silent, while American Shermans continued moving, shooting, and supporting infantry. When the Battle of the Bulge ended in late January 1945, German losses included over 600 tanks and assault guns. Many were simply abandoned, out of fuel or broken down, as German forces retreated. American losses were comparable in numbers, but U.S. industrial capacity replaced them within weeks. Germany couldn't replace theirs at all. The battle proved that in sustained combat, reliability, fuel efficiency, and maintainability mattered as much as armor and firepower. The Sherman had those qualities. German armor didn't. The Sherman's reputation as a death trap persists in popular culture. But statistical analysis reveals a more complex truth. Crew survival rates tell an interesting story. U.S. Army analysis from 1945 showed that when a Sherman was knocked out, approximately 80–85% of the crew escaped. This was the highest escape rate of any tank in the war. By comparison, T-34 crews had roughly 50% escape rates, and German tank crews varied widely depending on the vehicle. The Sherman's design contributed to high crew survival. It had large hatches that opened outward. The crew compartment was spacious enough for men to move quickly. The ammunition was stored low in the hull, and later models used wet stowage with water-jacketed ammunition bins that dramatically reduced fire. Risk-got early Shermans did have a tendency to catch fire when penetrated. This was primarily due to ammunition storage arrangements that placed shells in vulnerable sponsons above the tracks. When a round penetrated, it often struck ammunition, causing catastrophic fires. The U.S. Army recognized this problem in 1943 and implemented wet stowage by 1944. Ammunition bins were lined with water jackets and glycerin solution. If a penetrating round struck them, the liquid would cool the ammunition and suppress fires. This modification reduced fire rates by approximately 80%. Late-war Shermans with wet stowage, designated with a W, like M4A376W, were significantly safer. British studies showed these tanks had fire rates comparable to or lower than German tanks. The earlier Ronson reputation stuck, despite the problem being largely solved. Regarding the Tommy Cooker nickname, post-war research suggests this wasn't actually widely used by German soldiers. It appears more commonly in post-war literature than in contemporary German documents. Germans typically called Shermans simply Shermans, or occasionally Mickey Mouse tanks due to rounded shapes. The more serious question is comparative lethality. Were Shermans more likely to kill their crews than other tanks? Data is incomplete, but available evidence suggests no. Soviet T-34s had worse crew survival rates, despite being lauded as excellent tanks. German Panthers caught fire frequently, especially early models, where engine fires were common, even without enemy action. Tigers were rare enough that statistical comparisons are. Difficult American tanker mortality rates were approximately 3% of armored division personnel, lower than infantry mortality rates of 15–20%. This suggests tank service, while dangerous, wasn't the death sentence popular myth suggests. Tankers had better survival odds than infantrymen. The book Death Traps by Belton Cooper, an armored maintenance officer, heavily influenced the Sherman's negative reputation. Cooper's anecdotes described horrific casualties and burning Shermans. However, historians have noted Cooper's position as a maintenance officer meant he saw every disabled tank but rarely saw successful operations. His perspective was systematically biased toward casualties. Combat analysis showed that most tank losses occurred from mines, anti-tank guns, and infantry weapons, not tank versus tank combat. The Sherman's armor was adequate against these threats most of the time. When it failed, crew survival rates were relatively good compared to other armies' experiences. The psychological impact of facing superior German tanks shouldn't be minimized. Sherman crews knew their tanks were outmatched by Panthers and Tigers in direct combat. That knowledge was terrifying, but the actual statistical risk was lower than crews believed. A common phenomenon in warfare where perceived danger exceeds actual danger. Modern analysis suggests the Sherman was roughly as safe as other WWII tanks, with better crew escape rates than most. The reputation as a death trap is more myth than mathematical reality. But myths can be more powerful than facts, especially in shaping historical memory. The Sherman's greatest strengths came from an unlikely source: American automobile manufacturers. In 1940, the U.S. Army approached Detroit with an unprecedented request. Could civilian auto factories produce tanks? Could assembly line techniques that churned out thousands of cars monthly adapt to military production? The answer would change warfare forever. Chrysler, Ford, And General Motors didn't just manufacture tanks, they reimagined tank production using automotive industry principles, standardization, interchangeable parts, modular design, quality control procedures. These concepts were revolutionary in military manufacturing. Previous tank production relied on custom-fitted parts and hand assembly techniques. Each tank was slightly different. Repairs required skilled craftsmen who could file, fit, and adjust replacement parts. This approach worked for low production numbers but couldn't scale. Detroit's approach was different. The Sherman was designed from the start for mass production. Parts were manufactured to precise tolerances, so any component from any factory would fit any tank. A transmission from Chrysler's Detroit arsenal would bolt into a hull from Ford's River Rouge plant without modification. This interchangeability extended throughout the tank. Suspension bogies, track links, engine components, guns, radios, all standardized. The U.S. produced tanks the way it produced Model T Fords, as products, not custom vehicles. The Sherman's design emphasized ease of assembly and disassembly. The front-mounted transmission could be unbolted and removed in about an hour with basic tools. The vertical volute spring suspension, VVSS bogies, could be replaced individually without disturbing adjacent components. The turret could be lifted off completely for major repairs. German tanks, by contrast, used complex overlapping road wheels, especially on Panthers and Tigers, that required removing multiple wheels to replace inner ones. Transmissions were deeply integrated into the hull. Repairs that took American crews an hour took German crews days, if they had parts and tools available. Quality control was another American advantage. Detroit factories implemented statistical quality control, a relatively new concept in the 1940s. Parts were measured and tested. Defect rates were tracked. Production lines stopped when quality issues appeared. This ensured that Sherman tanks left factories in consistent, reliable condition. German production, especially late in the war, used slave labor and operated under constant Allied bombing. Quality control was inconsistent. Sabotage occurred. Some Panthers left factories with cigarette filters jammed in oil, passages or improperly torqued bolts, ensuring failure but difficult to detect during initial inspection. The Sherman's design also anticipated upgrades. The large turret ring could accommodate bigger guns. The engine compartment could fit various power plants. The suspension could handle weight increases within limits. This future-proofing meant the basic Sherman design remained viable throughout the war and beyond. Compare this to the Panzer IV, which started the war as Germany's main medium tank. By 1945, the Panzer IV was at the absolute limit of its design. Adding more armor strained the suspension. The small turret ring prevented significant gun upgrades. Further development was impossible without complete redesign. American automotive engineering culture emphasized reliability over performance. A car that broke down constantly was commercially worthless, regardless of its top speed. This philosophy transferred directly to tank design. The Sherman prioritized reliability over cutting-edge performance. German engineering culture, particularly in military applications, often prioritized peak performance over reliability. Tigers and Panthers represented this mindset. Incredible capability when working, but working less often than needed. The Sherman also reflected American logistical thinking. It was designed to be shipped overseas. Width and weight were constrained by shipping capacity and the need to cross bridges. It had to work with available fuel supplies. These practical considerations shaped every design decision. Detroit's contribution to Allied victory is often overlooked, but it was fundamental. The Sherman wasn't just a tank. It was a product of American industrial philosophy applied to warfare. And that philosophy valued reliability above all else. The Sherman's reputation varies dramatically depending on who's asked. Soviet and British users provide perspectives distinct from American experiences. The Soviet Union received 4,065 M4A2 diesel Shermans through Lend-Lease, primarily serving in Guards tank units. elite formations. Soviet employment differed from American doctrine, but crew reactions were consistently positive. Dmitry Loza, commanding the 46th Guards Tank Brigade, equipped entirely with Shermans, wrote extensively about his experiences. His memoir provides rare Soviet perspective on American equipment. Loza praised the Sherman's mechanical reliability, noting it rarely broke down, compared to T-34s, which frequently required field repairs. Soviet crews particularly appreciated the auxiliary power unit, a small gasoline engine that could charge batteries and power radios without running the main engine. T-34s lacked this feature, forcing crews to run main engines for radio operations. Wasting fuel and revealing positions, the Sherman's 5-man crew arrangement was superior to the T-34's 4-man layout. In T-34s, the commander also served as gunner, overloading him with responsibilities. Sherman commanders could focus on tactical situation awareness while the gunner engaged targets. This improved combat effectiveness, especially in sustained operations. Soviet tankers noted the Sherman's superior crew ergonomics. The interior was spacious, visibility was better, and controls were less fatiguing to operate. During multi-day operations, these factors significantly impacted crew performance. Exhausted crews make mistakes and fight less effectively. However, Soviet crews had criticisms. They considered the Sherman too tall, making it more visible and easier to hit. They disliked the gasoline engine. Even though their M4A2s were diesel, they associated Shermans with gas engines generally. Some felt the armor was inadequate compared to heavy German tanks, but these criticisms should be contextualized. Soviet tankers faced the full weight of German armor on the Eastern Front, including the vast majority of Panthers and Tigers. Their expectations were shaped by extremely intense combat conditions. That Soviet Guards units continued using Shermans throughout the war speaks to overall satisfaction. British experiences with Shermans were extensive. Britain received over 17,000 Shermans through Lend-Lease, making it the primary British tank from 1942 onwards. British crews initially used American 75mm gun Shermans, then developed the Firefly variant, mounting the excellent 17-pounder anti-tank gun. British 1943 reliability trials compared Shermans to British Cromwell and Centaur tanks. The British officer commanding concluded Shermans were utterly reliable with minimum maintenance, outweighing any cross-country performance deficiencies. British armoured divisions standardized on Shermans specifically because of reliability. The Firefly variant solved the firepower issue. The 17-pounder gun could penetrate any German tank from front at reasonable combat ranges. British tactical doctrine placed one Firefly in each tank troop, platoon, providing specialized anti-tank capability, while other Shermans handled infantry support. British tankers gave the Sherman mixed reviews. They appreciated reliability and ease of maintenance, but shared American concerns about armor and gun effectiveness. The Ronson nickname originated with British crews. However, operational commanders consistently praised the Sherman's logistical advantages. Post-war, Britain continued using Shermans into the 1950s. British forces deployed Shermans during the 1956 Suez Crisis. Meanwhile, Britain scrapped nearly all captured German tanks as unusable. This practical choice reveals professional military assessment. Reliable Shermans were more valuable than prestigious but problematic German armor. Canadian forces also used Shermans extensively, sharing British and American experiences. French units equipped with Shermans during liberation praised their reliability. Polish armoured units operating with British forces used Shermans successfully. International users consistently identified the same strengths: reliability, maintainability, and availability. These unglamorous qualities won wars. Popular narratives pitched Shermans against Tigers and Panthers. Reality was more complex. The vast majority of German armor Sherman crews encountered wasn't elite heavy tanks. It was Panzer IIIs, Stug 3 assault guns, and various improvised tank destroyers. The Panzer IV was Germany's workhorse medium tank, produced in larger numbers than any other German tank, approximately 8,500 units. It was comparable to the Sherman in weight, armor, and role. Late-war Panzer IVs mounted the long 75mm KWK-40 gun, which was effective but not overwhelming. In tank-versus-tank combat, Shermans and Panzer IVs were relatively evenly matched. The Panzer IV had a slight edge in gun penetration. The Sherman had better reliability, gun stabilization, crew comfort, and faster turret traverse. In actual combat, crew quality and tactical situation mattered more than technical differences. Combat records show Shermans achieved favorable exchange rates against Panzer IVs. Neither tank dominated, both could destroy the other at typical combat ranges. The Sherman's numerical superiority and better operational availability gave American forces overall advantage. The Stu-G3 assault gun was Germany's most produced armored vehicle, with over 10,000 built. It mounted powerful guns, but lacked a turret, limiting tactical flexibility. Stu-Gs were primarily defensive weapons and tank destroyers. They were deadly in ambush, but vulnerable to flanking attacks. Shermans faced Stu-Gs frequently and generally handled them successfully. The Sherman's turreted design allowed responding to threats from any direction. Stu-G crews had to turn the entire vehicle to aim, giving Shermans critical time advantages in close combat. Panthers and Tigers are what everyone remembers, but they were uncommon. The U.S. Army estimated encountering them in only 10–15% of tank combat situations. The rest of the time, Shermans fought Panzer IVs, Stu-Gs, and various lighter vehicles. When Shermans did encounter Panthers or Tigers, outcomes varied widely. In open terrain at long range, German heavy tanks had decisive advantages. But in towns, forests, and close terrain, where most combat occurred, the situation was much more even. The Sherman's numbers allowed tactical approaches that negated German advantages. American doctrine emphasized combined arms. Tanks worked with infantry, artillery, and air support. Shermans wouldn't charge Panthers head-on. They'd suppress them with artillery, flank them with infantry support, or call in airstrikes. One underappreciated Sherman advantage was crew training. American tankers received extensive training before deployment. German crews, especially late in the war, often arrived at the front with minimal preparation. Well-trained crews in adequate tanks consistently defeated poorly trained crews in superior tanks. German tank destroyers like the Jagdpanzer IV and Hetzer were more common opponents than Tigers. These turretless vehicles mounted powerful guns, but had the same tactical limitations as Stu-Gs. Sherman crews learned to exploit their lack of turret traverse and limited visibility. The most dangerous German anti-tank weapon wasn't tanks at all. It was the Panzerfaust. This disposable infantry anti-tank rocket could destroy any Allied tank from close range. Likewise, towed anti-tank guns and mines caused the majority of Sherman losses. Against these threats, the Tiger's heavy armor offered no more protection than the Sherman's. Context matters enormously. In the flat, open terrain of North Africa or the Russian steppes, heavy German tanks with powerful guns had maximum advantage. In the hedgerows of Normandy, the forests of the Ardennes or Italian mountain towns, close-range combat negated armor and gun advantages. The Sherman was designed as a universal medium tank, a jack of all trades. It wasn't optimized for single-purpose tank duels. It was meant to support infantry, exploit breakthroughs, fight other medium tanks, and occasionally duel heavy armor when necessary. German armor was increasingly specialized. Panthers were designed to counter Soviet T-34s. Tigers were breakthrough weapons. Stu-Gs were defensive. Each excelled in its role, but struggled outside it. The Sherman's versatility meant it could handle varied situations adequately, if not spectacularly. Statistical analysis consistently shows that the most important factors in tank combat were seeing first. shooting first and hitting first. These depended on crew quality, tactical situation, and luck more than technical specifications. The Sherman's reliability meant it was available to fight. The tank that's broken down can't see, shoot, or hit anything at all. The Sherman's true legacy isn't about armor thickness or gun caliber. It's about understanding that wars are won not by the best equipment, but by adequate equipment in overwhelming quantity, reliably maintained and continuously available. Nearly 50,000 Shermans were produced between 1942 and 1946. This staggering number reflects American industrial capacity, but also design choices that made such production possible. The Sherman could be manufactured quickly, efficiently, and consistently because it was designed for mass production from the start. These tanks served on every front in World War II, from the deserts of North Africa to the jungles of Burma, from the beaches of Normandy to the islands of the Pacific. Shermans fought in every climate and terrain imaginable. No other tank design showed such universal applicability. The Sherman's post-war service life reveals its fundamental soundness. Israel used upgraded Shermans until the 1970s, 3 decades after initial design. The Super Sherman, with French 105mm guns and modern diesel engines, fought effectively in the 1967 Six-Day War and 1973 Yom Kippur War. No German world. War II tank design showed similar longevity. Multiple nations used Shermans for decades after WWII. Argentina, Chile, India, Pakistan, Paraguay, and others operated Shermans into the 1980s and even 1990s for secondary roles. The basic mechanical design was that solid and adaptable. The Sherman influenced post-war tank design significantly. The concept of a reliable, maintainable, mass-producible medium tank became standard. Soviet T-54-55 series, American M48 pattern, and British Centurion all reflected lessons from Sherman development, prioritize reliability and production efficiency alongside combat capability. German tank design philosophy, high-performance specialized vehicles in limited numbers, was decisively rejected. Post-war analysis showed it had failed. Complexity, maintenance demands, and production challenges made German heavy tanks strategically counterproductive despite tactical effectiveness. The Sherman taught armies that mechanical reliability is a combat multiplier. An elite tank that's broken down half the time is strategically inferior to an adequate tank that's available 90% of the time. Modern military procurement still struggles with this lesson, frequently prioritizing peak capability over sustained availability. Logistics and maintenance matter as much as firepower. The Sherman's design recognized this from the start. It could be repaired with common tools by moderately trained crews. Parts were interchangeable and widely available. This unglamorous reality won more battles than any superweapon could. The confession that gives this video its title comes from multiple sources. German crews who captured Shermans consistently praised their reliability. German commanders in post-war interviews acknowledged that American logistical superiority, keeping tanks running, supplied, and operational, was decisive. German technical superiority in individual vehicle performance couldn't overcome American reliability and numbers. A particularly telling incident occurred during the Battle of the Bulge. A German Panther battalion commander, when his tanks broke down yet again, was reported to have said in frustration, "Give me a dozen Shermans and I could win this war. At least they run." That sentiment captures the essential truth. The Sherman wasn't the best tank on the battlefield in any single category except reliability. But reliability turned out to matter most. Wars aren't won by superweapons. They're won by adequate weapons, produced in quantity, kept in working order, supplied with fuel and ammunition, and operated by well-trained crews. The Sherman exemplified this principle perfectly. The tank everyone loved to hate was actually the tank that won the war. Not through superiority in combat, but through availability, reliability, and persistence. German crews mocked it until they drove it. Then they understood. The M4 Sherman wasn't just a tank. It was a lesson in military-industrial strategy that remains relevant today. Perfection is the enemy of good enough. Complexity is the enemy of reliability. And in war, the weapon that works wins, regardless of whether it's the best on paper. That's the Sherman's real legacy, and why its story matters 80 years later.